My name is Ashley Matthews and I'm an associate in the employment team at Thompson Cell and Passmore. Following a recent poll that has revealed that a third of British workers feel their organisation is not effective in managing workplace stress, I'm joined today by my colleague Nick Hobden, who's a partner and head of the employment team. We're going to be talking about the new Acas guidance published in April 2023 on managing work-related stress, which will hopefully help in improving this quite shocking statistic. This is a particularly important time for this issue to be addressed, given that the Office for National Statistics has reported that the number of employees not working who have a long-term illness has risen to 2.5 million from 400,000 before the COVID pandemic. Nick, I understand that this guidance sets out some causes and signs of stress and how employers can spot the signs in employees. Could you please explain what the guidance says might be some causes and indicators of stress?
So the guidance explains that, according to the Health and Safety Executive, stress is defined as the adverse reaction that people have when placed under excessive pressure or other demands. Now, there are many factors that could cause stress for employees at work, and these could include individuals having too many or conflicting demands, meaning that it's difficult for them to manage their workload, or it could be that an employee feels as though they don't have adequate training to complete their work to a high standard. Now, other factors that could cause stress include poor working conditions, generally, for example, bullying, or conflict in the workplace, particularly if these are not managed properly, or perhaps even a lack of support from their managers at work.
Okay, does the guide only talk about stress in the workplace?
No, in fact, the guide, whilst obviously aimed at employers, recognises that there could be external factors at home which could be affecting an employee's stress levels more generally. Now, they could include a variety of circumstances which are difficult, such as divorce, poor health, someone who's suffered a bereavement, or that they have financial worries. Now, the latter point is particularly relevant at the moment because, as we know, during the cost of living crisis, more people are facing difficulties and they are giving rise to stress levels which are higher than we've seen before.
And so how might an employer spot signs of stress?
Well, it might be difficult for employers to actually spot the signs of stress in employees, as it will present differently in different individuals. But the guidance explains that signs of stress could include poor concentration, an employee finding it hard to make decisions, someone presenting as irritable or difficult, and perhaps even low moods. Employers may also find that employees experiencing stress do not tend to attend social events and seem to withdraw themselves from their team members.
It's very helpful for employers to have these indicators that suggest an employee might be stressed so that they can take the appropriate action as soon as possible. But what does the law say in respect of this, Nick?
Well, the guidance explains that there are two main pieces of legislation that cover work-related stress. The first one, dating back to 1974, is the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, and this is the primary legislation that puts the duty of care on employers to protect their employees from the risk of stress at work. So to provide them with a safe working environment and safe colleagues, and this has tended to include stress risks as well. The other important and relevant piece of legislation is what is known as the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999, and this requires all employees to make a suitable and sufficient assessment of the risks to health and safety of their employees. Now, it's important for employers also to remember that they need to comply with the working time regulations, because employees working particularly long hours without breaks could be a contributing factor to workplace stress. Now, in effect, what the Act and the regulations prescribe is that employers must carry out a risk assessment to protect their employees from stress at work. This could be done by managers either for their whole team or by job type, or if it's more appropriate, by individual on a regular basis, assessing the employee's propensity or risk of potentially succumbing to stress levels. Now, we must remember that employers if they have more than 5 employees in their organisation, must do a written risk assessment. And that will involve employers working with employees to identify the risks of stress, how to remove them, and how to minimise stress as well.
Okay, so how do employers go about conducting a risk assessment?
Well, there's actually a very helpful guide on the Health and Safety Executive website, and there's a useful section on preventing workplace stress called the Talking Toolkit. And there's a clever 6-section questionnaire that assesses the risk of stress from the perspective of 6 areas: demands, control, support, relationships, roles, and change. And if they fill each of those sections out with the employee and they have that talking toolkit conversation, they may uncover the causes of stress and may also find the ways in which that stress can be combated or minimised.
In terms of other legislation that might be applicable to workplace stress, is the Equality Act 2010 something that employers need to consider in this context?
Yeah, who can forget the Equality Act 2010? What that does effectively is it introduces for employees who succumb to so much stress that they become depressed or suffer from acute anxiety, that this may develop into a disability. Now, the definition of disability under the Equality Act is a physical or mental impairment which has a substantial and long-term, i.e. 12 months or more, effect on their ability to carry out day-to-day activities. So there must be an adverse effect on their ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. So if an employee is disabled, an employer must also make what are known as reasonable adjustments for them, and that might include additional rest breaks, flexible working hours, or providing training and mentoring, and that should be agreed on a case-by-case basis.
In terms of supporting employees with work-related stress, does the guidance provide any examples of what employers can do?
Yes, so the guidance includes many examples. It suggests that when an employer identifies that an employee is experiencing workplace stress, they should have an informal conversation with the employee in private in a sensitive and supportive manner. Now, tips for having that informal chat include asking open questions, trying to remain open-minded, trying to identify the possible causes of stress, and working together to identify possible solutions. Now, there may be cases where the employee doesn't feel comfortable talking to their manager about this, and it might be the case that they would prefer to talk to someone else. And an employer should be flexible about this. This could include perhaps giving them an opportunity to talk to their trade union representative, or perhaps an occupational health specialist who can work with the employee to try and reduce those levels of stress. But the important thing is that those conversations must remain confidential.
How about supporting those employees that are currently taking time off for work-related stress?
So if an employee is off work with stress, the guidance suggests that an employer should have a reasonable amount of contact with the employee concerned. Regular contact can be helpful because it makes the employee feel supported, helps them to feel included, prevents isolation, and also assists when the employee returns to work. But to ensure that the employee does not feel overwhelmed, the employer should agree with the employee how often they want to keep in touch and review this regularly to see whether it's working best for the employee. And then when an employee comes back to work, because obviously that is the aim, the employer should organise a return to work meeting and to identify in that meeting whether the employee is actually ready to come back on a full-time basis, whether they need any further support. It's also a good opportunity to agree a plan for returning to work in a sustained way, for example, phased return or any adjustments that might be put in place to help facilitate their return to work.
So these are all really helpful suggestions, but of course employers will want to try and prevent workplace stress as much as possible. What does the guidance say about prevention?
So there are a number of tips in the guidance which will help to create a positive environment. and help prevent work-related stress. They include fostering a positive and healthy culture at work, such as promoting work-life balance, encouraging employees to take breaks and holidays. All too often we see employees working so hard that they don't take their holidays when they should. So that's a positive plan. Supporting employees, such as listening to their concerns and acting on these quickly. And there might be other measures that can be put in place, such as regular and effective training to managers on managing conflict and stress, providing employees with access to support such as employee assistance programs. When employers do provide these employee assistance programs, we find that they tend to be used quite a bit, and they are a good way of supporting individuals. So in addition to complying with all these legal obligations which I've been telling you about, importantly, these steps will make employees hopefully feel happier and healthier, improve performance and reduce absence levels, because we've got to get these absence levels down from the 2.5 million or so people who are long-term ill health absent, and more employers should be doing more to help employees with stress. So I hope that's been helpful, Ashley.
It definitely has. Thank you so much for your time today.